Well, hello there, my friends, and welcome back. My name is Stephanie Safarian, and you're listening to episode 493 of Sustainable Minimalists. This is a listener-supported show about eco-friendly and intentional minimalist living. On today's show, I am reintroducing you to the number one way to improve your health, improve your wellness, improve your quality of life without spending any money at all. And that, of course, is by prioritizing sleep. Historically, science has shortchanged sleep. For decades, sleep was considered nothing more than that period of unconsciousness in which nothing really important happened. And our culture, too, which is heavily influenced by that rise and grind reverence for hustling, our culture both implicitly and explicitly makes the point, the incorrect point, that sleep is a waste of time. Resting is for lazy people, right? But the science of sleep in the last 3 decades makes the fact abundantly clear that quality sleep is fundamental to our health and wellness. Now, we're told, of course, that in order to feel good, we need to buy something. We need to spend money in some way, shape, or form on a thing or an experience and a vacation. But my goal today is to convince you, with science, that prioritizing sleep is not only free, but it's also one of the most powerful things you can do right now to improve your quality of life. Now, today's episode, it's one of those back to basics episodes. We've done a back to basics episode on how to breathe, on how to walk. I've linked to both of those in the show notes as well, because I must say, I think they're pretty darn good, but of course I'm biased. So today, yes, we're talking about how to sleep better, because while our culture tends to dismiss the importance of sleep, science, and specifically recent science, argues that sleep is medicine. Full stop. Now, my goal today is that by the end of our time together, you will actually start prioritizing sleep. So just like you perhaps prioritize exercise or getting outside or cooking homemade meals or spending quality time with your loved ones, whatever it is that you prioritize, my goal today is that by the end of today's show, you start prioritizing sleep once again. So no more falling asleep on the couch watching Netflix. No more getting up at 4 a.m. to check your work emails to get caught up. No, no, no. Now, speaking of work emails, I want to start today's show by talking about rise and grind culture. I have a lot to say. Rise and grind culture, also known as hustle culture. It promotes working hard, being productive, striving for success. Rise and grind culture also sometimes, very blatantly, promotes sleep deprivation. It can be all too easy to blur the lines between work and overwork. And overworking often comes at the expense of holistic well-being. I'm going to hopefully make that point today. But what's first to go when that line between work and overwork gets blurred? It tends to be sleep. It can sometimes feel as though American culture in particular not just dismisses sleep, but actually goes so far as to glorify sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation, oh, I'm so tired, but hey, I got my latte, so I'm good. Like that can be seen in America 2024 as a sign of discipline, as a sign of grit, right? I'm thinking about common phrases that we hear all the time, like you snooze, you lose, or I'll sleep when I'm dead. I must admit, I used to say when I was in my 20s and young and youthful and vibrant, I'll sleep when I'm dead, right? But collectively, we tend to prescribe to the idea that we can just spend that $7 or whatever it is these days on that venti latte from Starbucks for the pick-me-up we need after not getting good sleep. And we'll do it just like that because everybody else is doing it just like that. We'll do it also because we're stressed, we're spent, we're overtired. Now, in my view, of course, no surprise, there's a lot that's wrong with hustle culture, apart from its dismissal of the importance of sleep. Another big problem with hustle culture is that it implies that our individual self-worth is dependent on professional successes. This is such an ingrained American belief, isn't it? I must be honest, I have to consciously and constantly fight back against this culturally embedded view. It's embedded within me. The longer I produce this show, I also find myself more and more cynical. And so I do find myself wondering whether our American way of life dismisses sleep and glorifies the hustle so that our economic engines continue to run. I mean, think about it. If we sacrifice our own well-being by consistently not prioritizing sleep, we then may work longer and harder so that we have more money. And if we have more money, we have more assets of which to buy stuff. We, you and me, run on Dunkin'. That's Dunkin' Donuts, by the way, if you don't know what Dunkin' Donuts is. But we run on Dunkin' so that capitalism may run on us spending our money. I know that's cynical, but I do find myself wondering on those nights when I'm up late and can't sleep. These are the things that go through my mind. There's also the fact, too, of course, that when we sleep, we're unconscious. And when we're unconscious, we can't buy stuff. And so at the end of the day, in our late stage capitalist society, it always comes back to buying stuff. And I wonder whether our reverence for the hustle, for hustle culture, is in some way, shape, or form related to the capitalist engines that keep our economy running. I wonder. Well, contrary to what you've been told or what you've seen, sleep is not time wasted. Matthew Walker, he's the director of the Center for Human Sleep Science at the University of California at Berkeley. He wrote in his book titled Why We Sleep, this is what he wrote, and I quote, "The decimation of sleep throughout industrialized nations is having a catastrophic impact on our health, our life expectancy, our safety, our productivity, and the education of our children." End quote. Now, did you know every animal engages in some form of sleep? Horses sleep standing up. Dolphins sleep one half of their brain at a time. Great white sharks sleep while they swim. Elephants only sleep 4 hours a day, and yet every single animal sleeps. No species has evolved not to sleep. This should tell us that sleep is really darn important. If you've ever wondered why sleep hasn't been pushed out by evolution, the reason is that sleep is absolutely essential. Humans certainly could have benefited by evolving not to sleep, right? Like, think back to our hunter-gatherer days. Sleeping left us unconscious, and being unconscious left us vulnerable to attack by predators or enemies. But we didn't evolve to stop sleeping. We evolved instead to have a genetic predisposition to being either an early riser or a night owl. This served the tribe, the herd, right? Some in the tribe go to bed early while the night owls stay up. And then the people who went to bed early, they're the early risers, so they get up early and the night owls can get the rest of the sleep they need. So some are staying up by the campfire at different times while the others are getting the sleep they need. That's what left us as human hunter-gatherers less vulnerable to attack. Fascinating stuff, right? Tell that fun fact at your next social event and watch some jaws drop, perhaps. But what happens when we sleep? Like, what goes on in our brains, in our bodies? I want you to picture in your mind a submarine. Okay, your brain is the submarine, and you, my friend, are about to go on an adventure to the bottom of the ocean, aka the bottom of the sleep sea, if you will. That's a term I just coined on the fly, the sleep sea. But stay with me here. As you fall asleep, a series of physiological changes occur. Your heart rate slows, your temperature drops, your breathing becomes regular. And then your brain, that submarine, goes into a deep ocean dive into the sleep sea. Now, normally, this descent into deep sleep is rapid. deep sleep. So I want you to picture yourself at the bottom of the sleep sea. You're on the ocean floor, let's say. This deep sleep is characterized by very slow brain wave frequency. When we're at the bottom of the sleep sea, our brain selects important short-term memories to become long-term ones, yes, and that's important. But even more important than that, researchers have discovered that when we're in deep sleep, your submarine, your brain, activates a kind of internal waste disposal system that allows cerebrospinal fluid to flood in between neurons and wash away the junk in between your brain cells. And while this happens, this, by the way, is so cool, our neurons pull back to allow for cleaning. It's kind of like if you've ever lived in a city and you have to move your car on street sweeping days, it's like that. The cleanings that are cleaning the streets, sweeping the streets, of course, are the space between neurons. These cleanings flush out those neuroproteins that are linked to neurodegeneration. And if you don't believe me, know that studies have found that those who generally sleep less than 7 hours a night over decades have much more of these neuroproteins built up in their brains than people who slept for 7 hours or more per night. So when we're in the deep sleep, when we're at the bottom of the ocean, our neurons are kind of moving out of the way, let's say, so the street sweeper can come in and flush out the junk. How fascinating is that? All right, so that's deep sleep. But later in the night, the submarine that is your brain moves upward into the sea. So closer to the surface, but definitely not the surface, into REM sleep. This is when dreaming happens. And by the way, in a typical night, your submarine will cycle back and forth between the middle of the sea and the seafloor. So cycling between deep sleep and REM sleep. Each cycle lasts about 90 minutes, and both cycles are crucial to learning and memory. Now, REM sleep is most important for growing brains, aka our kids. So if you have children and they're not getting consistent sleep, they're not getting enough sleep, I also hope today that we get serious about bedtimes and sleep prioritization for our children. But REM sleep is important for us too because, well, for a number of reasons. But first, REM sleep helps us process our emotional memories. So REM sleep helps us separate our emotions from the memory of the negative or positive experience triggered by those emotions. And that's exactly why the age-old advice, oh, things will look brighter in the morning, is true, right? We remember the event, but we tend to, if not forget, we tend to at least lessen the pain associated with a negative event. And without this REM sleep break for emotional healing, some sleep scientists do argue that we would all be living in a constant state of anxiety because every single memory would trigger a surge of renewed emotions. So REM helps us maintain our emotional awareness. And if you're a human, you likely already know that there is a gigantic difference between how you feel after a great night of sleep versus how you feel after a terrible one. I'll say personally, I started observing my own sleep patterns and more specifically, my own sleep quality in the past 3-ish years, perhaps. I've always been a decent sleeper, but I've never prioritized sleep. It just tended to happen. But in the past 3 years or so, I've noticed, and the evidence is abundantly clear, that when I drink alcohol at night, I sleep terribly. Not only is the quality of my sleep absolute trash, I'm not getting the sleep I need to function the next day, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm also waking up at 3 a.m. wide awake and I can't fall back asleep. So I know As a 40-year-old, I can no longer metabolize alcohol like I used to. And I'm not talking about drinking lots and lots. Like even just 2 glasses destroys my sleep these days. The next day, I'm lethargic and cranky. I'm also eating horribly and way too much. My next day is ruined, essentially. And research into the effects of bad sleep backs up my experiences. So let's talk about bad sleep first, the effects of bad sleep, and then we'll flip the script and talk about good sleep. So every one single night of bad sleep has been found to have deleterious effects on physical performance and cognitive performance and emotional well-being too. We'll get to that in a minute. But there are short-term problems like an inability to focus, a lack of motivation, a loss of cognitive skills. But I want to make clear here the fact that the deleterious impacts compound the more and more nights we experience poor quality sleep. Culturally, we are just so unaware of the devastating effects of poor sleep on energy levels and performance. And that's because we humans do have the ability to adapt to sleep deprivation. And that's not a good thing. Like we tend to assume we're great at all the things, even when we're sleep deprived. But science says otherwise. I think about driving, for example. There is no breathalyzer to test whether a driver on the road is sleep deprived. And yet, a group of professional drivers, keyword, displayed a far worse reaction time in situations such as braking to avoid a crash when they are sleep deprived. So we think we're great at driving, let's say, as an example, but science says otherwise. Now, poor sleep is strongly correlated with cardiovascular disease and heart attacks. Let that sit in for a minute. Okay, poor sleep. So chronic poor sleep is strongly linked with cardiovascular disease and heart attacks. Yes, poor sleep puts our sympathetic nervous system on high alert, which mobilizes cortisol and adrenaline. Both of these hormones raise our heart rate and our blood pressure. And so that stress on our cardiovascular system is amplified by poor sleep. And I want to be clear here. Again, it's not just one bad night of sleep here or there. It's inadequate sleep over long periods that's associated with increased risk of a cardiac event. Now, the inverse is also true, of course. A lifetime of solid quality sleep may help mitigate the genetic risk of heart disease if you have a genetic risk of heart disease in your family. Poor sleep makes us eat more. So poor sleep, being defined as like 4 to 5 hours a night, suppresses leptin. Leptin is the hormone that tells us we're fed. Now, simultaneous to a suppression of leptin, poor sleep increases levels of ghrelin. That's the hunger hormone. So we feel hungrier and we eat more after a poor night of sleep. Now, related, you know it's true, poor sleep wreaks havoc on our metabolism. One sleep researcher subjected healthy young people to severely restricted sleep. So just like 4.5 hours a night. And guess what? Those young people had the elevated insulin levels of obese, middle-aged diabetics. Now, insulin resistance, of course, is a precursor of type 2 diabetes. Now, in terms of emotional health, sleep deprivation can increase the risk of developing depression and anxiety. It can also impact the severity of existing symptoms. There's the mood swings problem. Poor sleep can increase the frequency and severity of negative emotions, anger, irritability, hopelessness, while also simultaneously decreasing your ability to experience positive emotions. And you already know this one to be true, right? Like after a bad night of sleep, the color and vibrancy tends to fade from the next day. Living feels extra hard, doesn't it? And so, okay, I hope I've made the case that bad sleep inflicts major damage. But conversely, good sleep is essential to long-term brain health and whole body health and wellness. So we're going to take our ad break, but when we come back, we're going to discuss what emerging research says about sleep. It's going to surprise you. I'm just telling you now. And we're also going to get into 6 tried and true ways to sleep better. We'll do all of that after a quick sponsor break. And we're back. Before the break, we discussed the implications on our health and wellness of chronic bad sleep. We're now on to the part of today's show where I want to talk about how good sleep is medicine. I have mentioned on recent episodes that my book of the summer was called Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia. I've linked to it in this week's show notes as well. It's a book about how to live longer and healthier lives, essentially. And if that interests you in any way, shape, or form, I highly suggest you read this book. It's so good. So in this book, Living Better, Healthier, Longer Lives, the author talks about exercise and diet, of course, but he also argues that sleep is the absolute best medicine for your brain. Sleep is more important even, he says, than nutrition. So good sleep, it is a performance-enhancing drug. It is critical to optimal cognitive function, memory, and emotional equilibrium. Increasing evidence finds that sleeping well, now hold on to your hats here, okay? This blew my mind. Sleeping well is essential to preserving your cognition as you age. It is essential to staving off dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Now, on the converse, bad sleep, chronic bad sleep, is a powerful cause of Alzheimer's and dementia. Let that sink in for a minute. Even more research points to the fact that quality sleep in your 40s and even in your 50s are most correlated with the prevention of Alzheimer's. So to my 40-year-olds, my 50-year-olds listening, we especially need to be prioritizing sleep because getting good sleep most nights is the number one way you can do your part to hopefully prevent dementia. I know, right? Now, good sleep can prevent, or at the very least, scale back external signs of aging. I know, let that one sink in for a minute. Studies find that people who sleep less than they need tend to have older looking skin, flabbier skin, more wrinkles than people their same age who sleep more. So what am I saying here? I'm saying instead of spending $500 or whatever it is dollars to get that round of Botox that only lasts 3 months or so, start prioritizing sleep. Sleep is free and it'll make you look younger. Oh my goodness, yes. Oh, and it may help prevent you from developing dementia. Sleep is medicine. So if you're wondering, how long should you be sleeping? Well, our sleep cycles are greatly influenced by our age as well as external cues. Our ability to obtain that deep sleep declines as we age. It declines as soon as our 20s or our early 30s. Long sleep is also a problem. So research does not say get as much sleep as you can all the time. People who sleep 11 hours or more each night do have a higher risk of all-cause mortality. So there is an upper limit to how much sleep you should be getting. Know also that sleep cycles, and I'm sure you already know this, but they're greatly influenced by external cues. So if you naturally wake up earlier in the summer because the birds are chirping and the sun's out at 5 a.m., that's normal. Sunlight, noise, artificial lighting, all of this matters with regard to how long we sleep. Now, I will say that, yes, it is normal for sleep patterns to change throughout your life. But for those of you listening who have adolescents, during adolescence, there is a well-documented temporary, keyword temporary, shift toward late going to bed and late rising. So if you have a teenager and they sleep till 10 a.m., that's normal. And I suggest that you perhaps let them sleep. Their brains are developing rapidly, and their shift in sleep towards going to bed late, getting up late is normal. Now, I will say my mom, when I wanted to sleep in until 10 a.m. on the weekends when I was a teenager, she did not let me do that. But I suggest you let your teenagers do so. Many school districts, my own school district included, has shifted. So the elementary school kids are getting on the earlier buses so that high school can start later. That is to adapt to teenagers' normal sleep patterns. And it is, in my opinion, a really good practice. So let's move on to assessing your sleep. If you're listening to me today and you're thinking, I'm not getting good sleep, and I should be, I would love to direct you to a free online resource. It's called the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. You can take it again for free, and it will assess whether perhaps you need to talk to your healthcare provider. Perhaps you have some warning signs of sleep apnea or insomnia or some other sleep disorder. I want to say too, it's normal for those of us once in a while to get bad sleep because we're stressed out. But there's a feedback loop happening between poor sleep and stress. It goes both ways, right? Higher stress levels make us sleep poorly, but poor sleep can also make us more stressed. So both poor sleep and stress activate the sympathetic nervous system. That's part of our fight or flight response. And when we're in the sympathetic nervous system, when that's activated, cortisol, the stress hormone, gets released. Glucose also gets released from the liver, which results in elevated glucose levels. And if elevated glucose levels are left unchecked, you know what's next? Potential type 2 diabetes. And so, yes, let's just make clear the fact again, there is a close relationship between sleep duration and risk of type 2 diabetes. So if you have a sleep disorder, I must be honest and say that the following 6 suggestions that I'm about to give for improving sleep quality may not help you. I want to make clear that if you do have a sleep disorder, or perhaps you're concerned you have a sleep disorder, again, I strongly suggest you talk to your healthcare provider about it. But let's not forget, right? We Americans tend to gravitate toward quick fixes in the form of little pills. Just take a pill and our insomnia will disappear. The U.S. sleep medication market is estimated to be at about $28 billion per year. Again, let that sink in for a minute. Let that sink in. We are not sleeping and we're relying on medication to help us get to sleep. And that would be fine, perhaps, if these sleep medications actually actually worked, right? Critics argue that Ambien, Lunesta, and other sleep medications, yes, they do make us go unconscious, but they're not helping us get to the bottom of the sleep sea. They're not helping us get to the deep sleep or even that REM sleep that we need. Okay, so yeah, they make us go unconscious, but they're not truly solving the problem. And then there are, of course, the benzodiazepines, the Xanax, the Valium. Those also, though, come with a host of problems as well. So what's my point here? If you're not sleeping well and if you don't wake up rested and recharged most mornings, it's time to get to the bottom of that for your long-term health and well-being. Just because American culture dismisses the importance of sleep doesn't mean that we, as intentional living sustainable minimalists, should prescribe to that lifestyle, that culture, that hustle grind. No more. All right, so how to improve your sleep. I have 6 research-backed tips, but I will say each tip comes with mini tips, so it's more like 20 tips. I have so many tips today. Okay, now some of them you're gonna have heard before, but you've heard them before because they are tried and true. And the first one, of course, is to make your bedroom's environment conducive to sleep. This is where minimalism plays in, right? Get rid of the junk that's stressing you out, the pile of laundry, the clutter in the corner. Make your room very dark. Keep your bedroom at around 65 degrees Fahrenheit. I know that's a little chilly, right? Our body temperature drops by about 1 degree Celsius as we're falling asleep. So we can help that process by keeping our bedrooms cool. Related to making your bedroom's environment conducive to sleep, remember that clock watching tends to raise anxiety around not sleeping. So turn your alarm clock away from you, assuming you have an alarm clock. This is huge for my children. We used to have alarm clocks in their rooms, but they would quite literally stare at the clocks at bedtime. And the more and more minutes that ticked by, the more and more stressed out they became that they weren't falling asleep. So guess what I did? My husband and I, we just took the clocks out of their rooms and voila, problem solved. Now they're not stressed about being stressed and not sleeping. So that's tip 1. Make your bedroom's environment conducive to sleeping well. Of course, also in there, take your phone out of your room. If sleep's a problem for you, take your phone out of your room. Just do it. Leave it downstairs. Okay. Tip 2, mentally prepare yourself for sleep. So again, leave your device downstairs, but don't look at your device before bed. Don't sit on your couch watching television and scrolling on your phone. We all do it. But these devices, and I'm not talking about the TV, I'm talking about the cell phone, the tablet, they bombard us with blue light, and blue light activates our brains. Activating our brains is the opposite of what we're trying to do as bedtime nears. Now, if you're saying to yourself, well, I watch TV before bed and that doesn't prevent me from going to sleep. Well, yes, you're right. Science supports that experience. TV does not activate our brains the same way a tablet or a cell phone does. And it may be, scientists postulate that it may be because watching TV is a passive act, whereas scrolling on our phones, reading is active. Okay. So TV seems to be okay, but cell phones not okay for mentally preparing for sleep. Now, related to this, don't do anything stressful before bed. Don't check your work emails. I do this sometimes. It's a bad habit. Don't do anything that's going to stress yourself out before bed. Don't check your work emails. Don't watch the news if the news disturbs you. Perhaps instead, pop on a guided meditation. Mentally prepare yourself for sleep. That's tip 2. Tip number 3. This is the one that has made all the difference in my life, frankly. And that is, do not drink alcohol before bed. Alcohol absolutely destroys sleep. And that's not Stephanie saying it because Stephanie's lived it. That's science saying so. Alcohol is indeed a sedative, so it makes us pass out. It makes us go unconscious. But again, like Ambien, like Lunesta, the quality of sleep tends to be complete trash. And for me, this has definitely happened more and more as I've gotten older. Even just 2 drinks, when I drink them somewhat close to bedtime, will result these days, unfortunately for me, in a hellish night of tossing and turning. And so it's just no longer worth it to me to drink at night. I did look up, how close to bedtime can a last and final drink of alcohol be? The science is murky on this. I've heard don't drink at least 3 hours before bed. And that tends to work for me. So my last drink of alcohol, let's say, is around dinner time, 6 o'clock-ish. And I don't drink past 6 o'clock much anymore because, again, it destroys my sleep. And if my sleep's destroyed, my next day is destroyed. So try that for you. No alcohol 3 hours before bed. See how that works for you. Of course, if you're drinking 6 glasses of something at 6 o'clock, it's likely not going to be metabolized before you go to bed at 10 o'clock. So keep the amount you're drinking within reasonable amounts as well. So that's tip 3, don't drink alcohol before bed. Tip 4, a quick and easy one. If you are in the habit of napping during the day and napping is hindering your ability to sleep at night, so you're going to bed later and later because of that afternoon nap, don't nap. No more napping. Science suggests, and again, it's a bit murky here, but science suggests that it's better to have quality sleep overnight as opposed to a cat nap here or there. And I'm not saying that to say that a cat nap is not beneficial in terms of wellness. It can be, but if it's disrupting your night sleeping, perhaps you consider no longer napping. All right, tip 5. Another quick and easy one. Go to bed a little bit hungry. Now, I'm not saying ravenous, where you can't fall asleep because you're starving. No, that's not what I'm talking about. But go to bed a little bit hungry. Again, we talked about don't drink alcohol at least 3 hours before your bedtime. Don't eat 3 hours before bedtime. So if you're a late night snacker on the couch, getting yourself ready for bed and setting yourself up for improved sleep and prioritizing sleep means not eating 3 hours before bed. And finally, this is for my listeners who do have trouble with sleep. If you truly cannot fall asleep, you're staring at the ceiling, your mind is racing, get up and go into another room and do something easy and relaxing. So you can get up and out of bed, but don't put your phone on. Don't go fold laundry. Don't check your work emails. Don't give your insomnia a purpose, as my Outlive book likes to say. If you give your insomnia a purpose, insomnia will become a more regular character in your life. Insomnia will become more regular in your life. Now, for me, I'll say, like, if something gets me hot and bothered and I'm stressed out and my mind's racing and my husband's snoring next to me and I'm annoyed that he's sleeping, but I can't fall asleep, the minutes are ticking by and I can't sleep, I would historically go downstairs and I would think to myself, while I'm awake, I might as well get something done. No. Do not give your insomnia a purpose. You can get up and you can go somewhere else, but do something relaxing. Perhaps read a book, let's say. So let's recap my tips really quick. Number 1, make your bedroom's environment conducive to sleeping well. Number 2, mentally prepare yourself for sleep. So do stuff like in the hour before bed, or don't do stuff like checking your phone before bed. Mentally prepare yourself for sleep. Number 3, don't drink alcohol before bed. Number 4, go to bed a tiny bit hungry, so don't eat before bed. Number 5, if napping during the day is hindering your ability to sleep, stop napping. And finally, if you truly can't fall asleep, do not give your insomnia a purpose by doing something hard or mentally challenging or taxing. Go do something light, easy, and breezy. Now, we do have an eco tip today, and it comes from Kim. Kim's tip is to move all product categories together in your house so that you may more easily see minimizing opportunities. So what does Kim mean by this? Kim said that she had baby clothes that she was saving in a bin. She also had baby clothes hanging up in the back of a closet. When you put them all together, you see all the baby clothes you've got. So she's combining product categories together. She also said with regard to the baby clothes that when she had them all together, she noticed that some were yellowing. That inspired her to donate even more baby clothes to people who need them now rather than saving them for her hypothetical, maybe someday in the future grandchildren. She realized too that when she combined it all together, she was not only keeping way too much, but she realized too that perhaps her children, when they have grandchildren, are not going to want these heaps of baby clothes. They're going to want new clothes for their precious daughter, right? So when you group everything together, it makes it easier to see what you've got and what you can pass on. Thank you, Kim. Excellent, excellent tip. Now, really quick before we say goodbye, I want to know, what do you want to hear more of? What do you want to hear less of? Send your thoughts my way. Emails in the show notes. I might not respond, but I will read it. I promise. My email, again, a hot mess. If you like this show, if you learned something, if you're going to either think about life differently or do something in your life differently, please consider leaving it a review. It is the #1 free way to ensure that this show sticks around. So thank you so much. And of course, too, if you love the show, please consider becoming a subscriber. Money is real tight right now at the show. Like, that's what's keeping me up all night, if I'm being frank. So if you love the show and you want it to continue, please consider supporting it with $5 a month. The link to do that is also in the show notes. We'll be back next week where we're discussing the Enneagram. Yes, we are. I'm so excited. I'll see you Tuesday for that. Reach out if you need me, and take care.